What's going on, everybody? It is Overreaction Time once again. I'm your host, Simon Samano, and welcome to this second edition of the show. And with me this week is the not one time, but two-time nominated MMA Media Award Journalist of the Year, the one and only Nolan King. What's up, Nolan? What's good, man? How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to make my debut on here. I know you guys killed it with your debut last week. Really excited just to chop it up. Huge weekend. Great fight card for me to debut on as well.
Yeah, UFC 308 this past weekend in Abu Dhabi. So much to talk about, so we're going to jump right into it. Nolan, are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, Kamikaze, you know what time it is. Hit it.
Are you guys that fucking stupid? You can't be that fucking stupid.
MMA Junkie AI.
Who gives a shit? Is that how pound for pound works? In common sense, everybody knows that.
All right, Nolan, here we go. We're going to jump right into this UFC 308 this past Saturday in Abu Dhabi. We're going to start at the very top, the main event. Ilia Topuria, man, he followed through. He did what he said he was going to do. He did what nobody's done before. He knocked out Max Holloway. So I don't know about you, man, but I was taken aback by the performance. I thought it was incredible, and I'm going to go ahead and hit you with this one right here, Noli. Ilia Topuria will still be UFC featherweight champion at the end of 2025.
Yeah, I don't think that's an overreaction at all. I think if you look at the landscape, right, he came in, he beat Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway, who I think are the two guys that even if you were to take a step back now and say which guys, if he went head to head with anybody, who would have the greatest chance of beating him, I would say it would be those two guys. Diego Lopez is a fresh face there, but I'm not necessarily sure that he is as proven in certain ways like Max and Alex are. So I don't think that's an overreaction at all. I think we could, for a rare instance in 2024, 2025, see a guy that's able to hold the title for a year. We don't see, this isn't 10 years ago where that used to happen with pretty much every champion. You'd have these long reigns. Now it's like very rare for a fighter to kind of hold the title for longer than a year. So with all that being said, I do think Ilia is special. He's young. He seems to be improving. And the fact that he's already knocked off the two guys that I still think are probably, I think most of us would say, are the toughest fighters and challenges in that division, I don't think that's an overreaction at all.
That's the thing, man. I mean, that's the thing for me. If you look at the division after Volkanovski and Holloway, it's Diego Lopez, who you mentioned, Yair Rodriguez, Movsar Evloev, Brian Ortega, Arnold Allen, Josh Emmett, Aljo's at number 9. Obviously came up for bantamweight. I mean, who among that crop really would have the best chance next year? The key is next year. Who would have the best chance next year among that crop if they get a chance?
Yeah, I mean, Diego and Aljo at least provide maybe a little bit of a different challenge for him. So that obviously we know styles make fights. I think both those guys, their grappling abilities, Diego Lopez, everybody knows him because of his hands that he's been showing off in these fights, but it's really high-level black belt. I mean, he's Alexa Grasso's coach for a reason in jiu-jitsu, and then you got Aljo and the skill set that he brings that isn't always pretty, but relentless wrestling. So I think those are two, in terms of the style department, that would be interesting for me. But outside of that, I mean, he's going to have such an advantage, I think, on especially with Aljo on the feet. And then, I think Diego's a little more well-rounded, but I would have to go with Topuria, I think, at this point in time. So I don't know, man. It's tough. It sounds like we're going to get the Volkanovski rematch next, which I have mixed feelings about it. I understand giving a legend is due. I always thought Jose Aldo, he got iced by McGregor, and it was at a time where champions were always getting rematches. He never got his. So I hate to be kind of contradictory to the way that I've always said things, but seeing Volk get knocked out 2 consecutive fights and then kind of be in a rematch that when there's other contenders I don't love. So it's going to be an interesting 2025, but maybe it's recency bias. Maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid of the Ilia Topuria here, but like, to me, I think that I don't see anybody that can beat him.
I mean, listen, dude, last week on this show, Fada and I were talking about some of the cringe stuff that he was saying leading up to this fight. And I mean, when you go out, though, and you back it up, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I don't care how cringe you are. If you back it up, dude, you back it up. And Ilia Topuria with everything that he said coming into this fight, and then declaring that he was going to knock out Max Holloway, told him at the weigh-ins to his face that he was going to be the first one to knock him out during their last face-off. To follow through on that, dude, I'll eat crow. I mean, I'll eat crow. Count me in. The Topuria era is here. And let me tell you something, dude. There's been nobody at 145 who's had power like Topuria probably since Conor McGregor 8-9 years ago. And that's pretty scary. That's pretty scary for the rest of this division. Final word, Nolan.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. You know, he did the same thing with Volkanovski too. Like, you know, he kind of bullied him a little bit about being old. And, you know, I know Volk leaned into it with the whole, the promo video he did for his betting company or whatever that was. And then the cane at the press conference, but it held true. I mean, when you talk smack, I think you open yourself up to be a victim of trash talk when it doesn't go your way. But if it does go your way, what are people going to say? You said you were going to do something, you did it. And I appreciate Topuria. Like, I think it's pretty evident he's doing this to sell fights. Like, he's been, after the fact, nothing but respectful to both these guys. I know Holloway and Volk both said the same thing. They're big fans of his and the way he's treated them after the fights and whatnot. So I get it. You got to say stuff to sell stuff in 2025. But just a tremendous full package fighter right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what happens. We agree there. We expect Ilia Topuria to be the champion at the end of 2025, but we will see how it unfolds. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is the co-main event at UFC 308, where Khamzat Chimaev went ahead and pretty much dominated Robert Whittaker, submitted him in the first round towards the end of it. Man, dude, I mean, heck of a performance after a year away and coming off the illness that he had that kept him out. So let me just go ahead and hit you with this one, Nolan. Khamzat Chimaev is unstoppable, and therefore his UFC title reign is inevitable.
Overreaction. I think we've seen flaws from him. We've seen when things don't go well for him in the first, you know, if he doesn't get it done in the first round, the second round, that there have been issues with his cardio. I mean, the Gilbert Burns fight and the Usman fight, he seemed to be slowing pretty significantly as the fight went on. So if he can get somebody that can, it's a big if, but if he can get if somebody against him can prevent that mauling in the first round that we saw, you know, with Whittaker have to go through, I'm very intrigued to see what will come from that. I mean, can he keep up that pace? Has it been injuries? Has it been health issues that made him not necessarily look maybe up to people's standards in that Burns in the Usman fight? I don't know. I think we need a bigger sample size to tell, but I do have my concerns with this gas tank just from what we have seen.
Let me tell you, watching that fight, you could sort of see the energy kind of being sucked out of Rob. I feel like that's what happens in these fights with Chimaev when it goes to form the way this one did, right? When he gets that early takedown and he's on you and he's smothering you and he's relentless. And you just sort of feel like, you know, like the energy, the mental energy is sapped out of his opponent. That's what seemed like happened to Rob. And if I'm looking at these rankings, you know, if I'm looking at what's happening here, would you have really what we're talking about here at the end of the day is what Dricus du Plessis as champion right now and Sean Strickland. I mean, those guys to me don't exactly have the footwork to really match up well with Chimaev to be able to fend off his takedowns. I could be wrong, but I mean, if those two guys fight next for the title and he faces one of those two guys, to me, I feel like I'm taking Chimaev in that matchup. But I'm wrong.
No, I agree with that. I think that he will be, you know, right now in the division, there's really good stylistic matchups for him. I mean, we saw Rob even take down Dricus fairly easily when those two fought, you know, way back when, or not that far back when, but
yeah. And you know, Strickland's just going to stand in front of you flat footed. I mean, I just don't, I don't, you know, if he were to win that fight against Dricus, I don't see it.
Yeah. I mean, at this point in time, I don't feel comfortable picking any Dricus fights at all. Like, I don't think I've picked one single one right. I always pick against him and he wins. So this would be like the next, this is the perfect matchup to suck me in to pick against him again and then have him win again. The guy doesn't make sense. I'm very intrigued by that fight. Again, I hope that they go with Dricus versus Khamzat next. I know Dana had already kind of publicly said that it would probably be Sean and walked that back a little bit on Saturday with his comments saying it was not really sure and it was a toss-up or whatever. So I love the fight. I probably would lean with Khamzat, but I just I am so bad at Dricus just has my number, man. I think he has everybody's number at this point.
He does. He surprised me in the Adesanya fight, but like I said, I just feel like Chimaev. Chimaev, I feel, and this may sound corny to some extent, but there's a mental warfare that goes on in these, in the build up to these fights. At this point, I really do feel like Chimaev he really is viewed as the boogeyman. Like if there was ever a boogeyman label for somebody, it's him. And it's the way he fights, man. It's the way he just comes out, is going to impose his will on you. Yeah, he's going to smother you. It's going to make you tired, physically, mentally as the fight wears on. And I was just so surprised to see that from Rob. You could just tell every time he was like, I'm about to get up. No, I'm being dragged back. I'm dragged back down. I'm about to get up. I'm dragged back. Dude, that shit is just so. I can only imagine how frustrating that is. And to me, it's unstoppable, dude. And the title reign is inevitable for Chimaev.
Yeah. I mean, he looked fantastic at 185 too. I think that's a big part of it. Who knows what those weight cuts to 170 were doing to him? And I mean, that performance on Saturday, like you said, the boogeyman thing is so accurate. I mean, when he came in, those first few fights, he had this real presence about him. I mean, he was a huge breakthrough star. And then I think through those fights, like the ones I named, the Burns and the Usman fights, I think he kind of lost a little bit of that where people were questioning him. Is he not as good? And then he wasn't fighting too. So he was just hanging out in this narrative of like the last time we saw him, he wasn't as good as we thought he was going to be. But I think that thing on Saturday, he re-railed himself onto that trajectory that we thought of, like, this dude is the like
huge
scary.
way. Yeah.
And so, I mean, just considering who he did it to, the way he did it. So, I think that there will be I think he'll be champion. I'm not sure that it will depend on what kind of matchups come out of the woodworks. But to me, the one that screams at me is the Bo Nickel one. I think that if Bo continues to build 2 or 3 fights, like if Khamzat's holding gold at that point, I think that's a fight we'll be talking about in a mega way if the stars ever align there.
Yeah, that would be amazing. But that's probably a good 18 months away, maybe.
Yeah,
something like that, 2 years. So, But before that, Chimaev's going to be champion, dude. It's going to happen. So, all right, we're going to move on to the next thing, but it's still talking about 308. And man, I'll be honest with you up front, Noli. I hate saying this one. All right. I hate saying this, but I truly believe it. You can forget about Max Holloway and Robert Whittaker ever reclaiming UFC titles.
I would say that's not an overreaction.
Pains me
I
to
don't
say
think
it.
that's an overreaction. I mean, I think for Rob, it's a little bit of a more uphill climb in that I think Max came into this with a lot of house money coming out of UFC 300.
Sure.
Before this fight was booked, we were, before this all went down, I think we were even talking about, would he stay at lightweight? He just went out there. He knocked out Justin Gaethje. That's a huge win. So I think there's new life for Max Holloway at 155. Let's see what it's like when he doesn't have to cut those 10 pounds. Let's see how he does up there with some of the stylistic matchups. I don't necessarily think it's again a really just tough division. So as time passes, I don't think he'll reach that title. I do think he could get a title shot up there. With Rob, I think it's a lot more challenging, right? When you start to have these performances where most of the upper echelon of the division has beaten you, you've already had a number of different title fights. Like, you're gonna have to do something really special to get back there. And sure, maybe he can. Maybe we saw it with Max. He fought Volkanovski 3 times. I think, and then he still got this one. So it's not impossible that Rob could get back there. I just think when you're a guy that's in the perfect division and you are beating your head against the wall trying to get that belt, and you're always 1 step away, and now you're 2 steps away, like, I do think it's going to be more of a challenge for him than there's less of a road to the title, less likely road to any sort of title opportunity than Max going up and saying, hey, I'm here. I'm the new guy on the block. He gets put in a big fight. Maybe he wins, and then he has a win over Justin Gaethje and somebody else. Like, that's a pretty good resume for 155.
You think Max at 155, like, how legit do you think his shot is? Because we've seen him there twice, of course, against Dustin Poirier back in, that would have been 2018 or 2019. Really got picked apart, got dominated. Of course, he's tough as nails and wasn't finished, but that was a super lopsided fight. And then against Justin Gaethje, his quickness, his speed, like against a guy like Justin Gaethje, that worked. But as you look at the division, I don't know, like, what's a favorable matchup for him that could actually propel him to a title shot, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to tell because I was very against him. Like, when that Gaethje fight got booked, I was like, oh, Holloway's doing this again at 155.
We all were.
Like,
I was the same way.
It went pretty well. So maybe now at this stage in his career, he's figured it out more. Who knows what the circumstances of the Poirier fight was. Again, it's tough when you have such a small sample size to kind of predict the future. But to me, I think there are some matchups up there like that he could do well with. I mean, you look at like the Dan Hookers of the world and the Benoit Saint Denis or Renato Moicano, like those sort of fights. I think if they were booked, he could win. Now you start getting up and you start talking about Charles Oliveira, you start talking about Islam Makhachev, you start talking about Arman Sarukian. Like those are fights that I think he would be moderate to heavy underdog in. So again, styles make fights. You look at the division. I think there are some guys that like to battle there that are kind of in Max's wheelhouse. Just knocked out Justin Gaethje. Like that's a huge proving point to me. So I see him being able to establish himself as a top 10, maybe top 5 contender. But I think anything beyond that would be a little bit of a bold statement for me to make right now.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if Oliveira were to go out there and beat Chandler next month, then you're in a position where I don't know if that gets him a title shot right away, or maybe you introduce Max Holloway with that fight. I mean, perhaps maybe he's earned a fight that high up in the rankings, and sure, that's a matchup that could go. That maybe, I don't know, maybe that's one that he can win and then get a title shot. But against a Makhachev or even against Sarukian, I don't know. I'm not sure how Max fares against those guys. And then I agree with you with Rob, dude. I feel so bad for Rob Whittaker, man. Dude, just he's fought so hard to get that title shot. This was the one that would have gotten him the title shot again. And I think he could have had a chance to win the championship had he gotten over Chimaev. But unfortunately, dude, just got his jaw broken instead. It just sucks, man.
It's a cruel game. Everybody's favorite fighters end their career or that's in the final stages of their career. We see them in a sad moment,
It's true, man. I mean, there were so many. I felt like there was quite a few tweets on social media on Saturday that were like, "Damn it, my 2 favorite fighters lost today." And like that. It hurt me to say this, but that's why it hurt me to say, but I just don't see it realistic.
I even saw like a number of memes like before the fact of like people pretending to jump, gifs and memes of jumping off of roofs and stuff like me after seeing Max Holloway and Robert Whittaker both get finished on Saturday, and then fast forward 36 hours, 48 hours, whatever. And sure enough, but it's a cruel sport, man, but I don't know why we do this to ourselves.
Yeah. All right, man. Let's move on away from 308. And we're going to talk about the continued war of words between Dana White and Francis Ngannou. But before we talk about it, I feel like it's important for the viewers to be reminded of some of the things that were said this week by Dana White. So, Kamikaze, go ahead and roll the footage.
I'm going to tell you what I think about what Francis is all about the money. Francis left because he knew that if he fought John Jones and didn't win, it would hurt his chances of making the money that he wanted to make. But realistically, his deal was bigger here. His deal was bigger here if he stayed in the UFC. And I was going to cut Francis when he lost 2 in a row. I was going to cut him.
That was after the Derek Lewis fight?
Somebody around here begged me not to do it. There's a much deeper story to this whole thing. And he would have made more money if he stayed in the UFC. So he didn't want to fight John Jones. That's a fact, my friend. We're moving on. Someday I'll tell you the story. Francis was like, I was all about Francis in the beginning. And then I found out who Francis was. And I told the 2 guys who asked me not to cut Francis, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. And believe me, I have no sleepless nights over Francis leaving.
So just 2 more things on this. You wanted to cut him, but he went on to become the UFC heavyweight champion. So I guess what does that say about that thought process? Does it show he should have stayed?
Well, no. I didn't like Francis as a person. Wasn't a guy I wanted to do business with. My boys were telling me he's misunderstood. And I told them, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Yeah, it wasn't about him becoming the heavyweight champion of the world. Francis isn't a good guy. He plays the good guy. I don't understand the language, and so he seems like he's a nice guy. He's not. And he's just not a guy that I wanted to be in business with. Period. End of story. Whether he became the champion or not.
All right. Some strong words there from Dana White on Francis Ngannou and his departure from the UFC. Some bold claims, man. Some personal stuff being said there. I mean, this thing is just, swelled into some ugliness. What I want to tell you here, Noli, is that Dana White is completely out of bounds and full of shit when it comes to Francis Ngannou.
Yeah, I don't think that's an overreaction. I think, it's become escalatingly personal in a way that I don't think is necessary. He's talked to, he's been, I feel like his rhetoric or whatever you want to call it has gotten increasingly more and more and more and more personal. I mean, there was nothing more personal than saying somebody's not a good human, right? So when that's the end of, the end of the road that we've seen so far, who knows what's going to come next? But he was talking a little bit out of both sides of his mouth too about the pay. Francis is all about the money, but then he would have got paid more if he stayed here, which, I mean, to me, reading between the lines of that, and I think there was something that he said on the Power Slap press conference that kind of indicated this, was essentially, it seems like the deal that Francis was offered was probably good money, but it probably wasn't guaranteed. It was like, if Francis had won all these fights, yeah, he would have got paid more than anywhere else. But I mean, it's very convenient to leave out that piece of information, which seemed like what he was hinting at. So, yeah, I mean, I think he puts forth a persona that he says he doesn't care. You guys ask me about it, which is true. I mean, we do ask him, but to me, I think he definitely does care, right?
Yeah.
So
if he didn't care,
it's unfortunate.
Because if he didn't care, he could be the one to take the high road. Just kind of say, well, we didn't come to the deal, we went our separate ways. That's the end of that. And maybe he doesn't want to talk about it anymore. But clearly, you can tell Dana likes when he's asked these questions about Francis Ngannou. He likes, doing this whole thing. And I mean,
yeah, I mean, he said the same thing about the PFL, but he showed up with a fact sheet to the press conference. Clearly so obviously, yeah.
I mean, the thing for me, Noli, real quick, is the whole all about the money thing. Saying that as though that's a bad thing, as if being about the money isn't what this game is all about. He's a prize fighter. It's all about winning a prize. It's all about taking care of your family. And for Dana White, someone in the past who has said, this isn't a career, like you being a fighter shouldn't be a career. He's on record saying something to that effect several years back, that it's not a career and you're kind of lucky to be in this position sort of. But, Francis got to a point. The bottom line is that Francis got to a point where he was able to beat the machine. He was able to beat the UFC machine. And that's a fact. That is a fact. He played his cards the right way and he was able to escape the restrictive contract that the UFC holds over fighters. And for Dana White to say that doesn't bother him, it bothers him because he doesn't want any more Francis Ngannou's situations to play out. He doesn't want that to happen. Why? Because the UFC preys on these fighters and the system against them. There's not enough fighters who are about the money, quite frankly, right? There's not enough fighters who have managers who will go to bat for them and fight for them. That's what Dana White and the UFC prey on, essentially. And that's how they become this massive, massive entity. And so, of course, this bothers Dana. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I mean, the thing is, right? Like, I think there would be other ways to frame this that I think would be less confrontational and less insulting. That would also, I mean, if Dana's trying to cover the UFC's butt or make themselves not look bad, or that having the heavyweight champion in the world walk isn't that bad. I think there's other ways that you could frame this. I mean, say like, oh, they're great. They paid him too much money. They paid him a lot of money. They paid him more than they're going to get on their return. All that sort of stuff. I think that's not unreasonable for something that you would see in other sports. I just think maybe perhaps taking this very personal approach, and it seems to be getting increasingly as worse. And I think, I don't think Francis has necessarily crossed those lines. Like, I think he's said things that are like, I can bring up the numbers, I can, do this, or Dana's mad or whatever, but it's not, I feel like there's layers of Dana's onion getting peeled back here. That's like, he didn't want to fight John. He's all about, he's greedy. Now he's not, I didn't like him. I almost cut him. He's not a good human. Like, I think to me that comes off as just a little bit, I don't know, like desperate's not the right word, but really trying to grab for something. And I mean, I remember like after that first Stipe fight, I have to go back and look, but I do recall him speaking in press conferences and saying something about Francis's attitude or something. There was something maybe around the time of that Derek Lewis fight. And then it kind of did fizzle. So I'm not even disputing that like that happened, but I think to just bring it up now, particularly where Francis went on to win the title, again, there's ways that I feel like if you're going to cover your butt, it's one thing. I get it. He's a promoter. Promoters promote. At the same time, to kind of just go that extra mile, I think it comes across as very kind of petty to me.
Yeah. And I mean, listen, dude, it has to be said for him to go out there and say, Francis isn't a good guy. He plays a nice guy. I'm sorry, man, but the guy who was caught on camera slapping his wife has no business talking about the character of anyone else. Full stop. Like, just shut up with that. That rubs me the wrong way to no end. So
yeah, and again,
anyway.
I think when you have I don't know, I want to call it pump fake, but when you say something and you don't provide all the details, like, oh, he's not a good person. Like, why?
What
you know
what
I
did
mean?
he
Like,
say?
what's
What
the evidence of you saying?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, again, I don't know. I kind of think this will probably be the worst that it gets, but I also it's MMA, so I won't be betting on that.
Yeah, it's MMA and it's Dana White, and it really does have the ability to get worse and more personal. And I guess we'll see, and maybe we'll be talking about it on this show again at some point in the near future. But anyways, we'll move on from now. For now, all right. Moving on to the next thing. Nolan, the UFC antitrust settlement, it got approved last week. And so I just want to go ahead and hit you with this one and get your thoughts. The UFC antitrust settlement approval, it feels like a bigger win for the UFC than the fighters.
Ooh, that's tough. That's a tough one because I think, again, I have mixed feelings on this whole thing. And I feel like having covered the legal side of the sport for a couple years now for Junkie, a lot of times it's almost like a gamble, right? It's like hedging your bets to figure out what you think might happen and try to protect yourself. So it's kind of a weird one for me. I think in certain ways the UFC got off easy. Now they also have this other lawsuit that's going on, coinciding the Johnson versus Zuffa. We'll see that. I mean, that's the injunctive relief thing.
That's
I think
the big
would be
thing.
the big.
The injunctive relief is everything, right? Yeah.
So, again, I would have to defer to more legal experts to say, hey, them removing the league class, them getting, splitting the two classes and having them run as separate lawsuits, like, does that hurt the chances that this Johnson thing will go through in the fullest extent with the injunctive relief? Or is it just, the same odds and essentially these fighters are the ones in the league class are getting, are just getting taken care of. They're just getting what they, everything except that, right? So yeah. I do doing some of the math, like I went through of what it's going to be projected for some of these guys that are in this class. And like some of the guys are going to make up really well. Like this is definitely some life-changing money for some of these fighters and making up for, if you can make up for the damage that they sustain in their career, whether it was financial, whether it was personal, whether it was, health-wise. I certainly understand, particularly reading some of those letters, like why they wanted that money, like why it's important for them to just get something versus risk it and maybe end up with nothing or end up with stuff, 20 years from now. And if this thing keeps going. So I certainly understand it. But at the same time, I think what made this whole antitrust suit such a big deal was the fact that it would perhaps change the business practices of the sport, of the promotion going forward. So it's really tough to tell. I almost feel like I can't give a take necessarily until that Johnson thing figures itself out, because I'm not sure what impact this being settled has on that. But I would say in a certain regard, like it probably is a win for the UFC not to, they have half the class,
now, at least.
One of the classes is done and they didn't have to give up the big thing. So it's a little tricky. It's a little murky.
Yeah, I'm saying for now, at least for now, this feels like a bigger win for the UFC than the fighters. I mean, it was a $335 million settlement that, according to reports, is going to end up being $240 to $260 million paid out to the fighters after fees and all that stuff. So they end up with about $240 to $260. I mean, already off the top, they're not getting the whole $335. We thought that number was a little suspect, to begin with. But that was when it was both. That's when it was supposed to be for both, right? Then they split it. So I don't know. It just feels like the UFC, for a company, TKO being worth $19 billion or whatever it's worth. I mean, $335 million just feels like, without all the injunctive relief, without anything that's really going to change the business practices and change the landscape of the sport right now, I don't know. It just feels like a bigger win for the UFC than the fighters. And I hope whatever the fighters get, for the guys who get a lot, I really hope it does help them. And those letters were absolutely depressing, reading about the mental and physical stuff that they've been, enduring. So we'll see. But there's a whole other aspect, like you said, with the Johnson case, and we'll see how that one plays out. So, all right, Nolan, I'm going to move on. Did you have one more thing you want to say about that?
No, nope. Go for it.
We're good. All right, we're gonna move on. All right. I like to offer you the final word, man. I want to make sure I offer you the final word. Okay, you're the guest on the show. I gotta offer you the final word. Okay. All right, man. We're gonna finish off with one more thing. Obviously, this weekend we have a UFC Fight Night taking place in Edmonton, and so we've got Brandon Moreno up against Amir Albazi. We've got Rose Namajunas up against Erin Blanchfield. Those are the top 2 fights in the card. I'm gonna hit you with this one, Noli. Monday's headline will read, quote, Brandon Moreno, Rose Namajunas, primed for UFC title shots.
Overreaction. I think that, for me, 2 things. I think first of all, they both have very tough matchups. I think the men's flyweight division right now is in a bit of a weird spot. Like, it's in a bit of I don't want to call it a rebuild, but with Kaya Sakura coming in, I think it does kind of
shakes things up.
It allows the division to figure itself out a little bit more. Like, by the time we're talking about the next title challenger, somebody else will have built themselves. But I mean, you got to think too, like, Roy Val has that win over Moreno not too long ago. Pantoja just beat Moreno. So I find more of a flaw in that one than the Rose side of things. It's a little bit of a logjam in the women's flyweight division, but I think they both have tough matchups. So I'm kind of hedging my bets that one of them may not look that good. It's, we're doing some sort of likelihood thing here. And then also, I think just with where the divisions are at, I think flyweight is in a weird spot. There's a couple guys that seem like they're on par with Moreno or maybe a little bit above him. And then also, there's a log jam at the women's flyweight. You got Manon Ferro still there. We're trying to figure out, is Valentina going to fight her? Is she going to fight Wei Li? Like, we haven't heard much from Wei Li recently. It seems like perhaps there's some signs pointing to a super fight there. So I feel like, again, things could shake out the way you said, but I like just logistically, I think that something in that is going to be flawed.
All right. Well, I don't think logistically. So let me just tell you straight up. Okay. Brandon Moreno took much needed time off, is what I'm going with this. Man, dude, like, it's tough fighting Davison Figueiredo 4 times out of your 5 fights over the course of 3 years. Like, I just feel like that was draining, preparing for the same opponent, almost in a sense, maybe even hindered his development as a fighter. If you think about it, like, because he's still pretty young when they started these fights back in 2020. So, this hard reset, 8 months off, took his time off. I expect him to come back renewed, re-energized. I'm expecting good things from Moreno in this second run. It's sort of like the second phase of his career. And then as far as the Namajunas Blanchfield fight, I mean, I just feel like it's too soon for Blanchfield. I know she's tough, but she's still only 25 years old. It was a clean sweep against Manon Fiorot. Like, I expect Rose to come out pretty crisp and pretty clean, and have a really strong performance. But you don't agree.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with any of that. I think the first thing with Moreno, like, taking time off, I would like to see more guys do that. I know it's easy for me to say, hey, now that you can make some money, I want you to pass up on $1 million paycheck, when you feel like you're healthy. I know it's
but kudos, props to him for doing it.
To do that, right? So, but at the same time, you're investing in yourself, you're investing in your health, and let's see what he looks like on Saturday. I think both of these were incredibly difficult fights for me to pick. I submitted my staff picks yesterday, and I was struggling with both of them. I agree with you. I understand your concerns with the Blanchfield fight. I think Rose can emulate a lot of the things that Manon did in that fight that we saw a few months back with Aaron, that was just very lopsided. I think perhaps, though, a big part of why Manon was doing so well in that fight was just the physical differences between the two of them. I mean, from the start of that fight week in Atlantic City, like, it was just so evident, looking at them visually, looking at how their weight cuts went. Aaron didn't seem to struggle very much. Manon's got all this muscle and she's really sucked down. So I don't know if Rose can emulate some of the strength and the, kind of the clinch brutality that Manon can use against Aaron to wear her down a little bit. But again, I wouldn't be, if the headline reads on Monday that Brandon Moreno and Rose Namajunas both won, I wouldn't be shocked. Now, will they do it impressively? It's tough to tell.
All right, man. Well, hey, listen, the time for overreacting has come to an end, unfortunately, my friend. But I hope you enjoyed yourself on the show. Did you have a good time?
Awesome. Can't wait to do it again.
Excellent, man. We're going to do it again. We will have Nolan back on the show at some point. And I just want to thank everybody for sticking around with us for this long on this edition of Overreaction Time. And until next time, you guys take it easy and we'll see you then.
MMA Junkie AI.